Once in Benin City of Nigeria lived a couple known as Mr. and Mrs. Ikedi. Mr. Ikedi's wife, Margaret, is a beautiful nurse who walks down the street every morning, walking through the busy streets as she greeted most people. Fine nurse, many of the people down the street will greet her. Her husband, Mr. Ikedi, is a businessman who sells provision down the street of Warake. His stores boomed with a lot of customers. Together, they had two children, a boy and a girl, named Achike and Chika. They were not so rich, neither were they so poor. They worked hard to make ends meet. A year ago, Nurse Margaret returned back from the School of Nursing, where she went to specialize in the field of gerontology. It was a very difficult time for the both couples. They hoped that after Margaret finishes from the School of Nursing, she will get a better job. She will get a better job, and they will of course improve their standard of living. Mr. Ikedi, on his part, worked so hard balancing business with taking care of their two children, including Chika, who was still a toddler. It's been 3 years since Margaret was enrolled in School of Specialty Nursing, and soon it was their graduation. Mr. Ikedi's joy knew no bounds. As he was there at his wife's graduation, he sat quietly at the front seat as the proud husband of the graduates. Together with their two children, it was a happy reunion. They are not going to be sharing their mother with some nursing school. Mr. Ikedi, on his own part, was very relieved. That weekend, after Nurse Margaret was home, she organized a small family party to show how grateful she is to her family for their support all through her specialty program. She was back for good, hoping she'll be leaving her 35,000 naira monthly job in a private hospital for a bigger job, a job that can justify her family's sacrifices. Nurse Margaret was very excited as she went about applying for jobs with utmost anticipation. Her husband's business, on the other hand, had been struggling to stand after shouldering Margaret's school expenses all alone. A lot of factors combined together to affect his business, both being a single parent, as Margaret was often in school, and also pulling large sums of money from his business to pay for his wife's fees. The financial tension in Mr. and Mrs. Ikedi's household was palpable. Finally, Margaret was on the street of Benin City, eagerly looking for a job. She looked for jobs in many hospitals but could not find one with good salary. Finally, she landed a job in a private hospital that paid her 50,000 naira. They were happy at what they got. At least 50,000 naira can buy them some one bag of rice. 3 months into Nurse Margaret's job, cost of things began to soar in the market. The house rent increased sporadically, and things began to fall apart. This time around, the center could no longer hold. There was stringent management in order to make ends meet. This resulted to strained relationship between Mr. Ikedi and his wife Margaret. Some days they would stay without being able to pay their utility bills. One particular day, Achike and Chika was sent back from school. They were owing in their face. Mr. Ikedi, who was hoping for his wife to start working and to help boost his business, was confused. He wondered at what to do. That was when they decided to sell the only property he had in order to start life all over again. But how are they sure that pumping money into their business will make them stand and get their desired results? They explored a lot of options. As they were still contemplating on what to do, one day, Mr. Ikedi met with a woman. She had come to buy provisions from his shop. She came down from a very luxurious car, bought some provisions and left. Few days later, the woman came back again. She was friendly with Mr. Ikedi. They talked about the current happenings in Nigeria. Madam Martha was quite concerned. "I wonder how you guys survive in this country," Madam Martha asked. As they talked, Mr. Ikedi learned that Madam Martha was a nurse, a big nurse who owns a big nursing home in the US. My wife Margaret is a nurse too, with specialty in gerontology. She even graduated one of the best in her class," Mr. Ikedi proudly said. Few days later, Madam Martha was at Mr. Ikedi's shop. They discussed more, and Mr. Ikedi summoned courage to say what has been on his mind. "Would you consider helping my wife to find a job in the US?" he asked with much courage. "Well, I can't guarantee anything for now, but whenever I have an opening, I will let you know. If she's lucky to pass the process, then I can employ her." Mr. Ikedi was happy at the flicker of hope Madam Martha's word had given him. Mr. Ikedi was soon home. He called on his wife and their children, and they prayed together, asking that his wife will get the chance to travel to America and work for Madam Martha. Each day, they kept on praying. Mr. Ikedi decided to delay the sales of his only land until he gets feedback from Madam Martha. A month later, Mr. Ikedi received a phone call from Madam Martha. It was a good news. Madam Martha's organization has an opening and Margaret could apply if she wants. Margaret quickly applied for the job, and Mr. Ikedi, having sold his only property, was able to sponsor her papers and trips. The joy in Mr. and Mrs. Ikedi's home knew no bound when Margaret's paper finally came out. The day Margaret left her husband Ikedi and their two children, they were at the airport for hours, crying and embracing each other. Margaret was soon at the United States and started working as a gerontology nurse. Every month, she would send money back to her family. Soon, Mr. Ikedi packed from where they reside to a more befitting part of Benin City. Everything Mr. Ikedi's family needed and more were supplied from Margaret. Though Mr. Ikedi wanted to expand his shop, but his children were still so young, he thought about giving himself more time in order to make sure that his children does not feel their mother's absence. He would therefore close his shop early and come back home to take care of the children's homework. Ikedi therefore closes his shop early to be with his children in person, making sure that their mother's absence will not put them in a disadvantaged situation. One day, Mr. Ikedi gave his wife Margaret a call. "Hey Margaret, my love, I've missed you. I believe one day you will make our papers so we can join you at the United States." Margaret was furious at Mr. Ikedi. "And who is your love?" she asked. "Because I'm now in the US, working my ass out and sending money to you wretched man, I have now become your love." Mr. Ikedi could not believe his ears. The more he tried calming his wife down, the worse things became. On another occasion, Mr. Ikedi proudly was showing off his son's results. "I make sure I teach them properly, and they are really making us proud," he announced. "Which us?" asked Margaret. "There is no us, and you should be ashamed that you are a wretched housekeeper. While other men are busy making money, you are busy eating my money. Look at his mouth like that of a pig. Let's begin to clap for you that you're a housewife," Margaret thundered. With each passing day, Margaret's words became more sour and ate deeper into Mr. Ikedi's heart. One day, Mr. Ikedi answered and said, "But babe, I thought this is a temporary arrangement. Remember that we agreed that you will apply for our papers so we can join you." "You come to America? Ha 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 ha. An illiterate trader like you," came Margaret's response. "When I'm ready, I will come and pick my two children," came Margaret's reply. By now, Mr. Ikedi was in regrets as to why he sent his wife to America with the money he made from the sales of his only property. One day, Margaret called Mr. Ikedi. The papers are out, she announced. Mr. Ikedi was happy that after 5 solid years, they could now join his wife so that they can live together as a family. He also began to learn some skills. I just want to start earning money as I arrive America. I want to prove to my wife that I am the man by providing for her. So finally, honey, we'll be uniting together as a family. You and who? Margaret replied. Do you ever think I will file for your papers to come to America? You want to come here and do what? America does not need wretched people like you. I filed only for my children, and I am coming back to pick them up. Mr. Ikedi was dumbfounded. He tried to understand what the problem is. Honey, I want to know what wrong I have done. You know I'm a very flexible person. If I have done anything wrong to you, please tell me and I will make amends, he said. Wrong, Ke. I am telling you that my eyes have been closed all this while. I mean, how can I ever have possibly married a man like you? You are an illiterate. You are wretched. You are unexposed. Look at the family you have come from. Your mother sells loi loi at the market, and your father is an ordinary medicine man. I wonder what I was thinking when I married you. Mr. Ikedi was more dumbfounded. So why are you coming back to take custody of our children since they are product of your mistake? Leave them alone with me and I will see to their upbringing, Mr. Ikedi replied. That same Christmas, as Mr. Ikedi was busy trying to close up his shop in the afternoon, a familiar face stepped out of a luxury car. It was Madam Mata. Madam Mata had been back to Nigeria. She had come to buy some provisions. Ah, Mr. Ikedi, how are you doing? Mr. Ikedi was happy to see Madam Mata. They talked at length. I hope your wife has started filing papers for all of you, she asked. For all of who? Replied Mr. Ikedi. It was there that Mr. Ikedi narrated his ordeal to Madam Mata. Margaret said America is not for persons like me. Madam Mata could hardly believe her ears. Most evenings, she would come to Mr. Ikedi's shop. Madam Mata could not but admire the way Mr. Ikedi took care of his 2 children. Before she left for America, she called Mr. Ikedi and asked if there is anything she could help him with. Now my children have grown up reasonably, I will want some money. If you can lend me some money to expand my business, then I will give you back within a year, he said. Madam Mata lent Ikedi some money with which he expanded his business. To his greatest surprise, his business began to boom beyond measure. He bought into distributorship of many household brands. Mr. Ikedi was able to pay Madam Mata back before the end of 1 year. Each time Madam Mata comes back to Nigeria, she always visited Mr. Ikedi and admired him greatly. My husband abandoned me at the hospital after I gave birth to my daughter. Now my daughter is 18 and she has never seen him or spoken to him. Now here you are staying back to be with your kids after sponsoring your wife to America. Madam Mata wondered at the irony of life that played out in both of their lives. Back at the US, Margaret's career continued to boom. She had already moved on with his boyfriend Edison. He was the owner of a clubhouse where Margaret usually spent the evening. They had been living together as couples for 2 years now. Every weekend, after the close of work, Margaret was at the clubhouse. She would help with the busy weekend schedules. Back in Nigeria, Achike and Chika are now 15 and 13. They are in high school already. Their father, Mr. Ikedi, had to explain things over to them. He called them and narrated his ordeal. Right now, he said, I am sure that both of you are old enough to understand what had been going on. This is 3 years your mother had cut off all forms of communication to us. She had moved on, forgetting all about the sacrifices we all made together to help us get a better life. After being incommunicado for last 3 years, she only called last 3 months to inform me that she is now married to a man who is really a man, that she has moved on. Mr. Ikedi continued. Achike and Chika were both sad. Are you sure everything is all right with mommy? They asked. From what she said, she have moved on and is now married to a man who is really a man. And that she doesn't want to continue with a wretched man like me. Achike and Chika cried every day and night. They were affected emotionally at their mother's action. How can she abandon us? Queried Achike. Something must be wrong somewhere, he continued. As the children went back to their school, they were saddened. Their academics was badly affected. Can we travel someday to go and see her? And really know that she's alright? Achike asked his father. It's been 8 years since Margaret left for greener pastures in the US. She neither calls her family nor picks their calls. On one of the Christmases, Madam Mata had come to visit Nigeria as she does. She and Mr. Ikedi ate quietly in a fast food that evening. Mr. Ikedi took her hand in his and proposed to her. Madam Mata happily accepted his proposal. Before Madam Mata went back to the US, she and Ikedi were married in a grand style. Mr. Ikedi's wedding with Madam Mata was the talk of the town. Mr. Ikedi's business had been doing well. He built a house where his family now resides. Mrs. Mata, too, perfectly understood the children's trauma. Her only child, Evelyn, had passed through a similar experience growing up without a father. She tried to cheer them up whenever she is around. What about going one day to America to go and see your mother? She suggested. Both Achike and Chika were excited at Mrs. Mata's proposal. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Achike became embittered by his mother's action. He doesn't even want to set his eyes on her, he volunteered. She's cruel. How could she? He said. But still, one part of him still wanted to see her, to ask her face to face why she would abandon them. Mr. Ikedi's business continued to boom. He soon built a two-storied building and rented it out to tenants. Mr. Ikedi was happy with himself, his accomplishments, and his progress. His children, being now grown, also helps him in his business after school. As Mrs. Mata went back to the US, she received the bad news. Margaret and his boyfriend Edison had been arrested. They were to be tried in a week's time. They had been dealing on drugs. They used their club as a muster point for all their drug deals and sales. One day, Edison was involved in a clash with some guys. Edison fired his gun at one of the guys, killing him. Margaret was implicated in the illegal drug business, and they were to face trial. Achike and Chika were the more embittered and embattled by the news of their mother's trial. They followed the trial every day on the television. Finally, while Edison received a life sentence, Margaret was given 5 years sentence in jail. Mr. Ikedi and his two children, Achike and Chika, wept at seeing Margaret locked up in jail. That same year, Mrs. Mata filed their papers and it was successful. They traveled to the US to go and visit Margaret, who had been imprisoned. They traveled together to see Margaret. Margaret was in prison in San Diego. Every day she would pick a quarrel with an inmate. She felt like dying. There was no family and no friend who came to visit her. All her family are in Nigeria. She also had discarded Mrs. Mata, who used to be her friend and boss. She had moved in with Edison and snubbed Mrs. Mata's advice to file her husband and children's papers. As the summer holidays drew near, both Mr. Ikedi and his two children, Achike and Chika, were on their way to the US. It was a long, tiring journey. They finally arrived US and were warmly welcomed by Mrs. Mata. After 3 days of rest, they set off to San Diego, where Margaret was serving her jail term. Margaret Ede, some people are here to see you. Their names are Ikedi, Achike, and Chika, said the prison warder. Margaret sprang to her feet and was soon at the reception. As soon as she entered the reception, her countenance changed. It was a mixture of shock and surprise. It was her two children, Achike and Chika, along with her husband. She could not bear the pains. "No, I don't want to see them," she said. She couldn't look at them. Her face was flooded with tears as everywhere looked dark around her. As she turned back to go back to her cell, Chika ran after her. "Mommy, I miss you," she cried, hugging her from behind. Mrs. Margaret broke down in tears. She knelt down there, her shame and guilt beclouding her vision. I am sorry," she muttered. "I don't know what came over me. I thought what we once shared was nothing compared to the life I want to live. But now I know better." Her first meeting with her family was brief. "We wouldn't be staying for long," said Mr. Ikedi. "In a month's time, we'll be going back to Nigeria." For the next 4 weeks before their departure to Nigeria, Mr. Ikedi and his two children made it a point of duty to always visit Margaret in prison. In one of the days, they went to the court for a court hearing. Her case had been appealed. That day, Margaret's case was reviewed, and her remaining 2 years was reduced to 1 year term. It was a prayer answered and a dream come true. Soon, it was time to go back to Nigeria. Both Mr. Ikedi, Achike, and Chika were soon back. The children, however, communicated with Margaret, their mother, every other day. Madam Martha, on her own end, wanted them to relocate finally to the US. She does not want her family living far away from her. Her daughter Evelyn was happy to finally have some siblings. It's been a year since Mr. Ikedi and his children came back to Nigeria. One day, they received a mail from the embassy. Their papers are out. They will be traveling to the United States to live there permanently. Mr. Ikedi does not want to leave Nigeria. "In my mid-40s, what can I do in the United States?" he asked. "I am too old to begin a career or learn a skill," he said. And most especially now that his business had prospered, why would he go to relocate somewhere where he will need to start life all afresh? But Madam Martha persuaded him. She encouraged him to come over to the US. "You can still learn a skill or even go to school," she said, her voice filled with hope. "I don't want to come over to the US and become a liability," Mr. Ikedi argued. "I don't want to be a misfit." "And who said you are a misfit and you can't learn a skill or go back to school and have a successful career?" Soon, Mr. Ikedi and his two children were in the US to join his heartthrob, Madam Martha. It's been 2 months since Mr. Ikedi and his two children arrived. They have been trying hard to fit in. They also went on the most weekend to visit Margaret. As Mr. Ikedi searched for what to do, he bumped into many jobs. First, he worked as a Uber driver. Then he learned some courses on IT. Mr. Ikedi had not been in school since 28 years ago, after he finished his high school. As he started his IT school, he soon realized that he had some special understanding on IT, and soon he chose his specialty. With hard work and determination and much dedication, Mr. Ikedi soon became a guru on cybersecurity. He furthered his studies and did many outstanding works in his bachelor's and even master's degree. Mr. Ikedi soon began to work in a big IT firm. He made so much money and was even richer than Madam Martha. Margaret finally finished serving her term at the cell. She was released. She, however, found it difficult to secure a decent job. Finally, with much difficulty, Margaret found a job. She began to pick the pieces of her life together. She was allowed to come and see her children twice every month. She was dazed at how stupendously rich Mr. Ikedi had become. She wished she had not let her coming to America enter into her head. She saw how foolish she was by thinking that her former husband, Mr. Ikedi, was wretched and that she was the only one who could help him out. She saw how phased her judgment had been on Mr. Ikedi. She could have still been married to him, and together they would have made so much progress and enjoyed the fruit of their labor. But unfortunately, she couldn't see tomorrow. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed this amazing tale. What do you have to say of Margaret's judgment of her husband, Mr. Ikedi? Please drop your thoughts on the comment section below and kindly subscribe as we load you with lots of amazing tales at African Tales by Oma. Bye for now.